Wondering if for any number of Australians it's provoking thoughts about our constitutional arrangement, about the monarchy that is, the fact that a new heir to our future is about to be joined in marriage with his princess, and whether it's making you think, well, this isn't a bad state of affairs, or whether it's sort of raising your bile and making you wonder about the way things are and wishing for change. Let's welcome our Friday Forum guests this morning. John Warhurst is Deputy Chair of the Australian Republican Movement. John Warhurst, good morning to you.
Good morning, Leon.
Philip Benwell is the National Chair of the Australian Monarchist League. Philip, good morning to you.
Good morning.
And let's welcome our guest right in front of me this morning, Professor Richard Herr, who is with the University of Tasmania, an expert in the world of politics. Richard Herr, good morning.
Good morning, Leon. And good morning, John and Philip as well.
And thank you to all of you for coming in, gentlemen. Is it a sensible reason to start thinking about our constitutional arrangements, Richard Herr? Is the idea of a wedding, a new king to be rolled out eventually, is it a sensible time to be talking about our constitutional arrangement in your view?
Well, in one sense, no, because after all, the whole point of monarchy is the succession is hereditary, and therefore it shouldn't necessarily make any real difference in one sense. In the past it did, of course, because if monarchs died, there was instability, but in modern times there are plenty of heirs to the throne. It's not going to cause a problem. And yet, because it's raised the question of whether we want to leapfrog Charles as the heir to the throne, it introduces this almost bizarre notion of a kind of democratic election of the monarch. Which monarch are we going to like? Do we think there's legitimacy in one candidate, as it were, more than another? Do we like the dad, or do we dislike the dad enough to want the son, etc.? These are things that are, to me, is very strange and very bizarre. I can't understand why people don't look at the contradictions when they talk about it as provoking this debate.
I think that's crazy talk. That should we skip a generation? I think it might be us. It might be media types and pollsters with an overactive thyroid. Philip Benwell, do you think it's sensible, in any way sensible, to be talking about moving on to the more popular and the more, I suppose, maritally acceptable heir? One generation beyond, if we're talking about who looks after us at the moment?
I think a lot of this is media hype. Under our system, when the Queen passes, Charles will become king, and he'll be a good king. And what I say to people is that the throne is a terrible burden. It's like being imprisoned in a cage, and don't wish that on William at such an early age. Let him enjoy his young life. Let him enjoy his marriage and his young family when it comes. And then in time, he will be king.
John Warhurst, do you think that from a Republican perspective, that the time to talk again in Australia about becoming a republic will be with the passing of our Queen?
No, not at all. I think the time to talk about becoming a republic is right now and always. What the wedding draws attention to is the fact that an undemocratic British institution provides a head of state, and Republicans don't want either Charles or William. In fact, they want a republic, an Australian, as our head of state before the Queen passes, if that is at all possible.
On your local ABC this morning, my guests, John Warhurst, Philip Benwell and Richard Herr. We've got the Australian Republican Movement represented, the Monarchist League, and Richard Herr, who we feel is somewhere around the middle of the discussion this morning. Gentlemen, what will you be doing for the wedding tonight? Richard, how will you be spending this evening?
Oh, well, I've got a paper to write, so I'm afraid I'm not particularly interested, I have to confess, in the wedding. I'm interested in the fact that people are interested in it. I find the global interest in it, with nearly a third of humanity allegedly going to be watching this event, as just a social phenomenon. I don't think it's a political one, but I think it's a social one that's interesting, and I'm taken a degree of interest in why people think it's an issue of interest for them. If you imagine yourself in your own wedding, would you have wanted 2 billion people watching you stumble down the aisle? Or
I would imagine I could barely get 80 people to turn up. And so I wonder, John Warhurst, if that doesn't raise questions for you, if 2 billion people are watching, if more than a majority of Australians are going to be paying attention this evening. Does that not suggest that this is deeply interesting and in some way valuable to the Australian public?
Oh, I no doubt it's deeply interesting, and like Richard, I take a sort of a sociologist's interest in why this is all happening. But if you look at the audience around the world, I think you have to. I would say that the British audience is largely interested in British royalty. The American audience is largely interested in celebrities, and the Australian audience is probably a mixture of the two. I'll admit there are Australians who will be watching the royal wedding out of a sense of belonging to this monarchy, but I think the large majority of Australians who will be tuning in have been either taken in by the saturation coverage of the wedding by the media, or, like Richard and others, just have an interest in what's going on. I'm actually in the unusual situation of having another engagement. I'm giving a public lecture on Australian Prime Ministers at the ANU where I work here in Canberra. It's not a protest, it just happens that the organisers organised the event a couple of months ago on the 29th of April. So I'll pick up the news as it comes along, and I'll read the papers in the morning, and that will be enough for me. I'll get my adequate information about the royal wedding that way.
And yet it won't be much for it won't be enough for most Australians, who will be no doubt feet up in front of the television. Philip Benwell, how do you explain the significance of the numbers of people that will be watching this wedding in Australia?
Well, I think it's a matter of great interest. The majority of Australians have long ago really lost interest in a republic, and I'd like to answer John Warhurst's earlier comment. If you want a republic debate now, why don't you put forward a model so that we can talk about it, instead of dithering about and talking about different things being negative? Put forward a proposal so we can talk about it. It's been 10 years now, 11, 12 years since the referendum, and we don't have anything on the table.
Philip, you know that there are things on the table. There are two acceptable models of an Australian republic: a parliamentary appointed president and a directly elected president.
Yes, but
so let's have none of this sort of confected attitude. You know that the big issues are on the table, and they continue to be on the table, and that's just a furphy as far as I'm concerned, Philip. When we come to another referendum, there will be a particular proposal on the table. That's the idea of referendums. It has to be included in the bill that goes before the Parliament. Until then, it's quite appropriate for Australians to discuss some of the details of what sort of republic they want.
But isn't it 12 years?
But no, I think Philip and John, part of the issue seems to me, where the steam has gone out, is convincing people that it's broke. And that comes down to the issue that I think, Leon, you were raising. Why a constitutional issue? Why is it a constitutional issue? And unfortunately, I think that a lot of Australians either are disinterested or sufficiently complacent that they have the attitude, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They're not going to look at it with care. And yet I think the three of us, at least, and probably you too, Leon, from the look on your face, deeply interested in how our Constitution provides the legitimacy that makes government work. And the question of, there are a whole range of issues that are affected here. I mean, the question of legitimacy: who do we trust when we get, for example, a minority government to decide who gets to be the Prime Minister? The reserve powers issue, where the Governor General or the representative of the Queen gets to make decisions that affect our lives. And these are genuine issues, and and I think what you're saying, John, and the Republican movement has been saying for a long time, is we want the outcome to be sufficiently legitimate. People don't question the process.